Welcome to the Corporate Governance Program. I'm Amir Qureshi. Thank you for being part of this program. Now, we're going to be talking about corporate governance in Pakistan and talking to some of Pakistan's leading directors about the state of corporate governance in Pakistan. Remember, this show is brought to you in association with the International Finance Corporation, who are promoting the message of good governance all over Pakistan through their corporate governance project in Pakistan.
The board of directors, in turn, are then responsible to the shareholders who elect them on the board. And they're the ones who are giving the equity.
And I'm glad to share this information with you that Pakistan is the second country in Asia which has developed the certification system for non-profit organizations.
We are complying with all the corporate governance laws that are in place today, and our board is fully equipped with that.
They had voluntarily accepted.
Okay.
For the past 5 years, I've realized that the compliance with the Code of Corporate Governance has increased over a period of time.
Let's now talk about the emergence of corporate governance in Pakistan. With a rapidly growing stock market and the continuing growth in our economy, there is renewed focus on governance practices of Pakistani firms. If we are to become part of the global village, we have to make sure that our companies are competing and having practices in place that are comparable to all the companies around the world. Now, in 2002, a comprehensive code of corporate governance was introduced by the government of Pakistan. The compliance of that code is mandatory for all public listed companies. The code does not, however, apply to small and medium-sized companies or unlisted companies. The banks are required to comply with special requirements which are even more onerous than the code of corporate governance that applies to normal listed companies. The corporate governance code is comprehensive and it specifies just about everything a company needs to do. Now, we'll be getting the perspective of some of the directors on what they think about the Code of Corporate Governance and what impact it's had on the state of governance in Pakistan. First of all, we're going to talk to Mr. Qazi Abdul Muqtadir from the State Bank of Pakistan and get his perspective on corporate governance and what it means for Pakistani companies. Thank you for joining us on the program. Corporate governance is a big and wide area. What's your take and what's your perception of what corporate governance is all about?
Corporate governance, which is not a new concept, is an area where corporate bodies are supposed to look after, govern themselves, and present themselves to the stakeholders in the best manner which is deemed out of them. There are 4 areas basically that one needs to concentrate on in corporate governance. The first is accountability. You have a body, a legal body, who are they accountable to? The second aspect is basically fairness. Is this corporate body, this legal entity, fair to all stakeholders? The third aspect is transparency. Are you transparent enough or not? And the fourth aspect is responsibility. So these 4 areas basically encompass what would become the code of corporate governance. And all of these aspects will come in. On the accountability area, you find that the management is basically accountable to the board of directors, who provide them the direction. The board of directors, in turn, are then responsible to the shareholders who elect them on the board. And they're the ones who are giving the equity to run the company.
One of the issues that often arises while we're talking about accountability and the role of the management and the board is sometimes a conflict of interests, conflict of priorities, and that does create a number of issues.
Yes, it does. And when you have conflicts coming in because of ownership, you might be putting in money into a corporate sector. At the same time, you might be doing business with the same entity. You have your own interests, and you might be taking out profits which the other shareholders may not be aware of. And that's where you come into the area of fairness. You have to be very fair to all shareholders.
Yes.
You cannot differentiate between the large shareholder and a small shareholder.
And the whole idea of protection of rights for minorities and so on is linked to what you're talking about, I suppose, in terms of fairness and equity.
Yes. After fairness, when you've looked into the area of being fair to all shareholders, then you come into the area of fairness to both the internal and the external stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving a product, you're giving a service. Are you fair to them? Are you getting the due share for the services or the products that you have offered to them? So that becomes a fair aspect where grievances are looked into. The third area goes into disclosures, transparency. How much would you like the external sector knowing what you're doing, how you're doing it, and the composition of that, your structure of it? All of that gives a lot of confidence to people who are taking services from the corporate body.
Mm-hmm. And the transparency, I suppose, when we talk about financial statements that companies have to lodge every year or put in front of their shareholders, etc., I mean, they have to follow generally accepted accounting principles, the international accounting standards, etc. But is there more to it than just simply following what's actually laid out?
When I ask you to do something, then basically you may do it your way. Now, we would like to have it done in a standard way so that we could compare between corporations. If I ask that I need a balance sheet, you prepare a balance sheet and you just give me bare that these are my total assets, these are my total liabilities.
Mm-hmm.
What is the breakdown? There may be a large corporation and a small corporation. As an investor, on the basis of transparency, I would like to invest into a company on the corporate sector in the equities market. Now, these balance sheets would help me to understand. As a user of service, I would like to know how good you are, how efficient you are. Now, these balance sheets and the trend of your past performance will tell me your efficiencies, and would I like to do business with you?
And on that basis, then you make a decision. As an investor, as a potential investor, the financial information and how well it's presented will help you make a decision. Then the final aspect of corporate governance that you mentioned, your 4 big points, was responsibility. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
On responsibility, we all have responsibilities. As individuals, as collective society, we have got a responsibility. When we look at responsibilities, we look on the civil responsibilities that we have. We look at the legal responsibilities, and as a corporate entity, what is the responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
Now, every person working in a corporate sector has a responsibility to his corporation, and the corporation has a responsibility to the stakeholders. Now, if they are in sync, then everybody is happy. It is a win-win situation. But if they're not in sync, then you would have a win-lose situation. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Will all depend on the performance of the corporation.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for sharing with us your thoughts and ideas about corporate governance. That was Mr. Qazi Abdul Muqtadir talking to us about corporate governance in Pakistan. We'll be back with more of the corporate governance program, so don't go away.